Hello. Hello. I messed up the screen here for a second. Hey, welcome to another live lesson. My name is Jennifer and I'm with English Outside the Box. And you're joining me live for another everyday English lesson live right here on YouTube. These everyday English lessons help you, a learner, improve your everyday speech. Before we get into the lesson, I wanted to know who's watching. I want to know where you're from, where you're watching me from, and I want to know your struggles with phrasal verbs. As you know, if you've been studying English for a while, phrasal verbs are so important. Phrasal verbs are necessary for you to reach English fluency. Now, why is that? Why are phrasal verbs necessary? Well, they're commonly used with native speakers like myself. I use phrasal verbs all the time. And I've actually run into difficulty when learning other languages because these phrasal verbs don't exist in a lot of languages. They exist in English. So if you're watching movies, listening to English podcasts, TV or movies, if you work with native speakers, any situation that you're going to be connecting and listening to English, you are going to hear phrasal verbs. So it's important that you understand phrasal verbs and know what they mean. Additionally, if you want to sound more like a native speaker, if you want to improve your fluency, you need to be using phrasal verbs because they're incredibly common. They're common in informal conversation. They're common in formal professional settings. Phrasal verbs are necessary for English fluency. So if you're joining the live chat again in the live chat box, let me know who you are. Let me know where you're watching from. And I want to know what your English struggle is with phrasal verbs. We're focusing on phrasal verbs today. Our lesson is about phrasal verbs. So hold your other questions for another video or for an email. So awesome. All right. So Adriana, welcome back. And I just want to note, I'm going to be sharing some of the struggles that students watching live have with phrasal verbs. And a really, really great point to start is with Adriana says that she has a huge book with phrasal verbs and she's discouraged to read it all. Now, Adriana, I'm imagining that phrasal verb book is a list, maybe. It has a phrasal verb, a definition, maybe a sentence example. Correct me if I'm wrong. Oh, guys, so many exciting countries represented in the chat today. So one of the challenges I'm going to take from Adriana, a lot of you learners have as well, is overwhelmed with so much information. Okay, so a really common problem that many learners have with phrasal verbs, a really common problem is there's too much. So how, where, why, how do you even begin studying if you have a book that's 200 pages of 500 phrasal verbs? Obviously, the idea 500 phrasal verbs explained is really great. However, it's really overwhelming because you don't have any direction, focus for those phrasal verbs. So I'm going to be addressing that issue, Adriana and everybody. We're going to be talking about ways to learn phrasal verbs. I'm sharing tips for learning phrasal verbs more effectively. These are going to be tips for you to be able to use them in your everyday speech a little easier than hopefully before. Hopefully these tips are going to give you the skills, the resources, the tools that you need to learn more effectively. So again, I am keeping an eye on the chat right here next to me. And if you have struggles with phrasal verbs, if you have challenges with phrasal verbs, let me know what they are so I can address them in this live session. let's get into it. Let's talk about the tips needed for learning phrasal verbs. So one tip, the first tip we're going to start off with is not really anything new. It's actually something that I have taught before, and it's learning phrasal verbs by a theme. So learning phrasal verbs by a theme. Why a theme, and why is that easier? What's the difference of just learning 100 phrasal verbs a day? Well, when you learn phrasal verbs by a common theme, it's going to be easier for you, for your brain, and for your memory to categorize these phrasal verbs. You're going to be able to categorize them easier and learn them in a more organized way. So you're more likely to remember them when you need to use them later in that theme. Okay? So when you're learning a lot of information or a lot of different things, when you're able to group them into similar topics, it's much easier for your mind to remember them. So an example you could do is phrasal verbs for cooking. So a couple of phrasal verbs for cooking. We have cool down, chop up, cut up, whip up. So off the top of my head, those are some common phrasal verbs with cooking. And if you sat down and you reviewed phrasal verbs with cooking, you could even do it while you're cooking, even better. You're more likely to remember them later. Now, to give you some definitions of the words I just gave you and some context, when you allow something to cool down, you allow it to decrease its temperature. So when you take something off the stove or you take something out of the oven, it needs to cool down before you can eat it. For example, before you eat the cookies that I just made, they need to cool down for 10 minutes. It's hard to wait 10 minutes, but it's necessary. When you cut up or you chop up something, it's when you take something bigger and you cut it or make it into smaller pieces. For example, you have to chop up an onion, you have to cut up some celery, cut up carrots, chop up radishes or zucchini to make food. So I needed to chop up an onion and cut up a celery stalk and put it in my recipe last night. Whip up is when you create or you make food really quickly. Last night I was so busy I could only whip up an easy pasta dinner. So learning by theme, for example, cooking, it allows your brain to remember them a little easier. And next time you're reading a recipe in English, you'll have those words related to cooking a little easier in your mind to remember. So welcome, Nushaib. Phrasal verbs are a weak point. You're in the right place. We're talking about phrasal verbs today. So Adriana says, you're totally right. More than 200 pages. I'm listening to your podcasts. We'll get to that, Adriana. All right. After a common way, again, is by theme. Give your mind the ability to easily categorize the information. Do not overwhelm yourself. Do not just look at a list of 100 different verbs. Learn by category. Allow your mind to learn them in an easier way. Second to that, tip number 2 is learning by a main verb. When you learn by a main verb, it has that same idea of categorizing information for your mind to more easily remember, use, and apply them later. So for example, we are almost we're in spring. We're almost in summer here in the desert, but we're in spring. Spring can also be a verb. So let's focus on phrasal verbs with the word spring. The main verb is spring, and then it has different particles attached to make it a phrasal verb. For example, spring for, spring from, or spring up. So when you allow yourself to learn by a main verb, then it's again another way to categorize information, organize your brain, organize your notes, organize your thoughts, and allow it to be more easily remembered and used later. Definitions for spring for. When you spring for something, you pay for something. For example, last night I sprang for dinner because I just got paid. So I've sprung for dinner many times. Last night I sprang for dinner to celebrate my friend's birthday, okay? Spring from is when something is caused or started from something. Spring up is when something happens instantly. So again, you can learn by main verbs. You can learn by main verbs. So those are the first two tips. If you're watching live, how do you feel about those two tips? Have you done those things before? Have you learned by a theme? Have you learned by a main verb? I want to know, how has that helped you? So again, if you're watching in the chat, let me know. Have you focused on learning phrasal verbs by a theme? Have you focused on learning phrasal verbs by a main verb? And how has that worked? Have you noticed that it's easier than just reading a big list or reading, a big book? All right. So I'm going to wait for you to answer that question in the chat. So I want you to tell me in the chat, or if you're watching later, write down, have you used those two ways before? Learning by theme, learning by verb. Let me know in the chat. Spring, like the season, going back, but spring for means to pay for something, not related to the season. All right, so welcome to the chat. Continue on in English. To continue, again, without context, Leticia, I don't know what you want to say with that verb. All right, so you guys can continue telling me in the chat what you think, but we're going to come back to the two ways that I just taught you, learning by theme and learning by verb. Those are a good way to learn. It helps your mind, again, categorize the information in a much, much easier way, so you're more likely to remember and use them. These are common. These are easy. Are these the most effective? No, these are not the most effective way, because you still run into the problem of having little context. You still run into the problem of just seeing a word, a definition in an isolated sentence. Now, can you learn English that way? Yes. Is it helpful? Yes. If that's the way you're learning, then do it. That is a way that you can learn. However, there are better ways to learn, and that's learning with context, learning by using, and learning by seeing how it's used. When you learn anything in context, you're going to be able to use it easier later, because you're going to already know how to use it. You're already going to have seen it being used. So going into number 3, the third tip for learning is going to be learning naturally with a conversation. Learning naturally in a conversation. So where can you have this conversation? Of course, you can have a conversation partner. You can have private lessons. You can be in your classroom with your teacher and your other students, and you can use them in a conversation. You're watching this video because you're probably learning on your own, at home, outside of the box, outside of those traditional ways. So let me tell you some ways that you can learn phrasal verbs naturally with a conversation. So a great way, you're probably already doing it, is learning with TV or movies. A couple weeks ago, I gave an everyday English lesson, and I talked about learning English with TV. Now, in the description of this video right now, there's a link for you to download TV worksheets, and these TV worksheets have the definitions of the phrasal verbs, so you'll be able to understand when they're used in context while you watch. So as you're watching TV, as you're watching movies, you can use my TV worksheets, or as you're watching, you can write down the phrasal verbs that you hear being used, and you can see and study and review how they're being used, and you can use them similarly later. So seeing how they're used in TV or movies is a great way. Now, Adriana has said that she listens to my podcast and trying to use the used phrasal verbs, but it's difficult because of the amount of them. So here we go again with being overwhelmed. However, there are ways to support this. So you can learn phrasal verbs naturally with a conversation in my weekly podcast. Now, of course, you can listen to any podcast with conversations and learn phrasal verbs. But obviously, I want to tell you about the resources that I'm creating for you, because they're resources that I'm passionate about and resources that I know can help you, because I'm creating them to help you. So English Across the Pond is a weekly podcast that's created by me and my UK English British friend Dan. Every week we have a natural conversation related to a theme. The great thing is that we don't plan these conversations. They're 100% natural, so you are able to see just exactly how phrasal verbs, expressions, and all kinds of language is used. Now, Adriana mentioned that there are a lot of phrasal verbs, and maybe there's too many. So each episode of English Across the Pond has an episode guide, and in that episode guide has the definitions for you to read and to follow. If you want even more support and you want to really be able to read and follow along and listen to the conversations and have the information in front of you, you have the opportunity to download transcripts. Transcripts are basically subtitles for audio. So if you watch TV and movies with subtitles, and you like it, then I highly recommend getting transcripts with the podcast, because in the same way you can read and follow along. Highlight the phrasal verbs, circle the phrasal verbs, really allowing you to focus on the many phrasal verbs we use naturally to help you use them. So giving you some ways to connect with these things. So tip number 3 was using conversations and natural conversations to improve and learn phrasal verbs. Why? Because you're going to hear and see how they're being used with context. This context is going to help you understand and know how you can use them later. So with TV, I have created a couple of sample TV worksheets that you can download. These worksheets are free. 2 sample episodes are free. And the link for that is in the description of this video. The quick link is bit.ly/TV worksheets. And again, those are free worksheets that you can download. If you want an entire season, you are able to buy these worksheets if you want even more support. If you want more support and more phrasal verbs, you can buy a whole season for a great deal. So EnglishAcrossThePond.com is how you can connect with the podcast and how you can learn naturally with conversations. And on the website, you'll be able to see how you can get the episode guide and how you can get those transcripts. So that is tip number 3, learning naturally with conversation. Again, you can watch any kind of natural conversation. Obviously, it's not only the resources I'm giving, but again, I want to give you the resources because I know they work. Moving on to tip number 4. Tip number 4 today is learning phrasal verbs again naturally in context. However, it's using blogs and written articles. So finding things online. This could be something obvious like news articles. Maybe you're already reading the news in English every day. And in those news articles, you most likely will see phrasal verbs being used. Phrasal verbs are often used in the title of things to grab attention and to really tell you what the article is about. Now, the great thing again about reading phrasal verbs with naturally written articles or blogs is, again, you're learning with context. You're learning how they're used naturally by a native speaker or a professional writer. So these writers are using it to convey a particular meaning, you can learn from that meaning. All right. So the great way, a great resource, again, I have for you for this article is Pinterest. So I don't know how many of you watching live have ever used Pinterest to research information. You know, you might have used Pinterest for recipes or cooking or maybe crafts, projects that you create. Pinterest is a great way to review English as well. And so I, as well as everything else in this, well, I'll add the link later. The link's not there now, but I'm going to share my screen with you and show you exactly how you can use Pinterest to learn English. So Pinterest, if you don't know, is a collection of boards and different resources online. So you have all of these different boards with a different theme. So I have English pronunciation, grammar, etc., etc. So English practice on YouTube. This particular board is all of the videos of lessons I have on YouTube with links that click directly to something. So let's get into the focus of today, which are these real English articles. So improve your real English with articles written in English. These are written by native speakers, by English teachers, by people who write professionally on their blog or for a living. So you'll notice this very first article right here, 7 better habits you can pick up without putting in any effort. When we click that, you are going to be able to go directly to the article. Now, this is not working for me right now because I believe it is my my board. I don't know why it's not being opened, or I think it's just moving slow. So basically, this article is going to teach you what pick up means and what put in. Right here. Do something uncomfortable today by stepping out of your box. You don't have to settle for what you are. So again, learning more phrasal verbs in context from some of these live, naturally written articles. All right. So let's come back here to me. So that is using Pinterest to find blogs and other articles written in English, naturally using phrasal verbs. Popping into the chat to answer some questions here. I don't read the news because I think they're even deeper and more difficult, but I will try now. Wow, Pinterest, astonishing idea. So yeah, it's not limited to the news. Reading real articles are not just news articles. Again, you can read articles related to you know, cooking or things that interest you. You can use Pinterest to find real articles. If you're not really sure where to start, you can use the board that I just shared that has about 10 different articles that you can read. So that was tip number 4, using blogs, using other written articles to learn phrasal verbs in context. So let's review what we've learned so far. We've learned 2 okay ways that you can learn. Learning by theme and learning by a main verb. Now, when you learn by a theme or you learn by a main verb, that's great because it is giving you some organization. It's giving you some similar piece that's going to tie the puzzle together. So that is going to be better than just a book or a random list. However, getting deeper and getting into better understanding is going to be learning with context. So tip number 3 was by using TV, video, podcasts, news, and different things to learn. And tip number 4 was using blogs and other written articles. We're going to move into tip number 5. And tip number 5 is really going to be for you if you are frustrated with not remembering phrasal verbs. Tip number 5 is going to be for you if you have been studying English for a long time and you're still not happy with your ability to remember and use information. So think about what you've been doing to study phrasal verbs and think about how happy you are with this level. Think about where you are with phrasal verbs. And if you're watching in the chat, if you're watching live, you can tell me in the chat, are you happy with your level of English, with what you've been doing? Have you been reading the news, watching TV, learning with books? Have you been doing these things, but you're still not happy with your ability to use phrasal verbs? So let me know in the chat if you're happy with your phrasal verbs. In the beginning of this video, I asked about some of the challenges that people have with phrasal verbs, and someone said phrasal verbs were their weak point. Adriana had mentioned that the phrasal verbs were too overwhelming because there was too much and just no direction to learn. So phrasal verbs can be difficult because there are so many resources, really. So tip number 5 for you to learn phrasal verbs more effectively is to learn with structure, to learn with a guide, to learn with a course, to learn with a program, or to learn with training. So there are a lot of free resources out there. Absolutely. You're watching a free resource right now. I've given you 4 tips for free resources. Most likely, you are going to, most likely you've been studying in free ways all the time with blogs and articles and all these different things. So I want to share with you a new training program that I am creating and launching next month to help my learners master and use phrasal verbs more effectively. So I have resources for you to learn. A lot of you are probably already inside of my resource library. In my resource library, there is a phrasal verb guide that you are able to learn and use to start. However, you're still going to run into the same problem of lack of context, lack of structure, and not knowing how you can use these phrasal verbs naturally and how you can start to use them in your own conversation. So I want to share with you everyday English phrasal verbs. Again, Everyday English Phrasal Verbs is a new training program that I've created with the help of my students telling me exactly what they want and what they need to learn. So many of my students, like a lot of you watching today, say that you're frustrated with learning phrasal verbs, you're overwhelmed, there's too many, it's a weak point, you don't know how to use them. So I've worked with some of my students to create this program by asking them what their challenges are and fixing it. I've asked them what they wanted to learn, and I created it. I asked them where they ran into trouble using the phrasal verbs naturally, and I've created and designed a way for them to use them that day, that month, that week in English. So I am opening doors to this training program officially on May 1st. So it's not open yet. It's still in the final developmental and design phases. I want it to be perfect when the doors open for everybody. I want the doors to open to a complete course that's going to help you change your happiness with your English use and phrasal verbs. So I want to invite you to join early and reserve your spot now. Because you're watching live and because you're learning with me weekly and a part of my journey in one of my students, I want to give you the opportunity to reserve your seat at the early bird price, so you can get in and you can make sure you're a part of this training program. So how can you sign up? You can sign up right now by going to bit.ly/everyday phrasal verbs. Now, I'm putting that link in the live chat, and the link is also in the description of this video, okay? So you can go and you can sign up for your spot in this Everyday English Phrasal Verb monthly training. I'll share with you the actual link too for you to join if you want to type in the whole thing and show you what sign up is going to look like right now. So Everyday English Phrasal Verbs, right? You're going to learn new phrasal verbs, and more importantly, you're going to start using them naturally in your everyday English use. Now, this is what is different from the other 4 tips that I've given you today. This is what is different from what you've been doing in English currently. So you've been studying lists, you've purchased books, you're reading blogs, you're watching these videos, you're doing all of these things to learn phrasal verbs, but you're still not happy, you're still not able to use them naturally. Let me help you start using them naturally in English. Let me help you start using them naturally in English. So again, doors are opening soon. May 1st is the official launch date. You can reserve your spot now for only $20 a month. Now, that's going to change, absolutely. The amount of material, support, guidance, and practice you're going to get is definitely more than this price. But again, I'm offering it to you now early to get in, to reserve your spots, and to be ready. So we call this early bird pricing. If you're not sure and you want more information, you want to know when I open the doors, you want to see inside the course first, sign up here and I can send you some more details and information before you enroll. What can you expect from Everyday English Phrasal Verbs? So every month, you're going to learn new phrasal verbs in a natural context. You're going to learn with audio, you're going to learn with text, and I'm going to show you exactly how they're being used. You're going to get a variety of different audio, video, and text examples to show you how they're being used, but the most important thing is you're going to learn how they're used naturally. Next, you're going to learn how you can use them in your own English conversations. This is where the training program is different from what you're currently doing, because I'm going to show you how you can start using them immediately. You'll get practical application to connect them to your own life. This practical application is how you're going to start using them, and I'm going to show you what you can do to remember and use them in your own conversation. With the audio, the speech, the video, and the materials you're going to get, you'll definitely get a chance to improve your pronunciation skills. So you're going to have audio, and that's going to give you the opportunity to practice linking, reducing, and natural English speech. What happens naturally as I do, right, as a native speaker. So this program is not a list of phrasal verbs and definitions. Absolutely not. This program is so much more than just definitions and example sentences. So should you sign up? Should you get in early? Should you enroll? Absolutely. And you should enroll. This course is absolutely for you if you are currently frustrated with your level of English, if you're tired of learning phrasal verbs and you're tired of not remembering them. This course, this program is for you if you're ready to do something different for yourself and you're ready to do something different for your English. So again, this program is going to introduce you phrasal verbs naturally by showing you how they're used, the meaning with additional sentences and different context, and it's going to show you the right way to start using them in your own conversations. You're going to learn with me, Jennifer, all right? Doors are opening soon, so remember you can sign up now and reserve your spot. So the link to join, the full link is courses.englishoutsidethebox.com/p/phrasal verbs. So that's the full link. You can easily just go to courses.englishoutsidethebox.com and you'll see the list of my courses there as well. So if it's something that's easier for you to remember, courses.englishoutsidethebox.com, and you will see Everyday English phrasal verbs right here, and you can get your spot early. Okay, so there's 2 steps. You're going to sign up and then you're going to enroll with the payment. So let's take it back here. Let's review everything that we learned today. Let's learn everything that we learned today, because you are able to master your phrasal verbs with these 5 tips. So the first 2 tips, we're giving you the easy, quick way to learn. However, it's not going to be the most effective. You need to learn with context. So learning with TV, movies, and podcasts are a great way, as well as written articles, blogs, and news articles. So you have all of those resources, Pinterest with natural articles. You have the TV worksheets you can download. You have the podcast you can listen to, English Across the Pond. And you can sign up for everyday English phrasal verbs now and reserve your seat at this special early bird price. So again, I created this program with the help of a handful of students who were telling me exactly what they needed and what they wanted. So I'm inviting you to join if you want to learn more effectively as well. If you don't join, you're going to continue to do what you're doing now, and you're probably going to continue to be frustrated and overwhelmed with your ability to use phrasal verbs and with the level of English that you have. So as an English teacher, I provide so many resources for you. But if you want more advanced training, you want more of my expertise, and you want guidance, then enrolling in a program, investing in yourself, and investing in formal training is the next step. So, great everyday English lesson for you this week. We talked about phrasal verbs and helping you learn them more effectively. Take these tips and start using them today. You can roll in the course and we'll immediately start talking about different phrasal verbs that you can do. You can join me every Saturday for these live lessons. We talk about grammar, idioms, phrasal verbs, pronunciation, test prep, all kinds of skills to help you master your everyday English. I'm Jennifer Nascimento. I'm with English Outside the Box, and remember, you can find me on EnglishOutsideTheBox.com. You can review lessons, materials, and ways to learn with me, and you can learn with me every day on Instagram. You can search for English Outside the Box or at JenESL760. We're doing 60-second Saturday later. Happy studying, enjoy your English journey, and I will see you later. Bye, guys.